In this movie brew, we're going to talk about Rob Zombie's 2007 remake of Halloween, starring Malcolm McDowell as Dr. Loomis, Scout Taylor Compton as Laurie Strode, Danielle Harris as Annie Brackett, Brad Dourif as Sheriff Brackett, Sherry Moon Zombie as Deborah Myers, Dag Fairch, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, as young Michael Myers, Tyler Mane as adult Michael Myers, and with William Forsythe, Udo Kier, Clint Howard, and Danny Trejo. A Halloween film is always going to be in the slate for Dimension Films. They toyed with everything from Halloween The Missing Years, which would deal with Michael Myers' early years in the asylum, to a crossover film with Hellraiser. Blech. Thankfully, that idea was dropped when a poll was put up in the official website, and fans didn't really respond well, as I'm sure you can imagine why. Rob Zombie had a meeting with the Weinsteins and had two films in mind that he pitched. A prequel that would deal with Myers' childhood, and the remake. The Weinsteins shot down the idea of the prequel, and Zombie instead opted to include aspects of that as the beginning of his remake. The deal was for Zombie to write, direct, produce, and serve as a music supervisor on the film, but before an official announcement was made, Zombie, who was a fan of the original film and a friend of John Carpenter, wanted to inform Carpenter that he was going to remake the film for Dimension. Carpenter gave Zombie his blessing and told him to make it his own. On June 4th of 2006, an official announcement was made, and on June 16th, Zombie announced that his film would combine the elements of a prequel and remake with original ideas in this film as opposed to a rehashed, shot-for-shot remake. Zombie wanted to reinvent Michael Myers because he felt that the character had become too familiar to fans and general audiences and made the character less scary. It's probably true. He wanted to delve deeper into the backstory of the character and, as he put it, add new life to the character. This included things like giving the mask an explanation as to why he wears it. He never really liked the idea that it was just a random mask that was stolen from a hardware store. Zombie also wanted the character to be true to the definition of a psychopath, which is kind of funny because I thought that's exactly what John Carpenter did in his original film, but whatever. And the mask would be a way for Myers to hide. Oh shit. And on top of all this, he also wanted his pursuit of Laurie to be more ambiguous, quoted as saying, "Was he trying to kill Laurie, or was he just trying to find her because he loves her?" He eliminated Myers being able to drive, reasoning that being locked up for so many years he wouldn't know how to. He also moved the character of Dr. Loomis into Myers' story more, as he felt that Loomis in the original film was just kind of showing up and saying something dramatic from time to time. Zombie announced The Bloody Disgusting in December of 2006 that Dag Fairch, now I still don't feel like I'm pronouncing that right, would play the 10-year-old Michael Myers, with Malcolm McDowell being announced as Dr. Loomis later the same month. On Christmas Eve of 2006, Zombie announced that Tyler Mane, who was in Zombie's previous film The Devil's Rejects, would play the adult Michael Myers. Scout Taylor Compton was involved in a long audition process, but Zombie later said that Scout was my first choice. There was just something about her. She had a genuine quality that didn't seem actory. Sherry Moon was cast as Deborah Myers because Zombie wanted a tall actress to play Michael's mother to explain where Michael got his height from. Tyler Mane is 6'8" after all. Actors who were considered for roles were John Hurt as Dr. Loomis, Danielle Panabaker, who lost the role of Laurie Strode to Scout Taylor Compton, and then ironically Compton later lost the lead role in 2009's Friday the 13th remake to Panabaker. I'm not sure if either one of them made out in this deal, to be honest. Emma Stone also auditioned for the role of Laurie too. We open with the Myers family having breakfast, and because Zombie insists on beating the audience over the head with the fact that Michael grew up in a broken home, we have the stereotypical checklist here. We got a damaged stripper mother, one slutty sister, a mentally and probably physically abusive boyfriend for mom, and he also makes some pretty sexual comments about the slutty sister. And then we have baby Laurie, who Michael affectionately calls Boo. But anyways, we open with the lovely family breakfast as our white trash stereotypes yell and scream at each other and hurl sexual innuendo around. I mean, seriously, just look at this shit.
Jesus Christ, Ronnie, you know I have to fucking work tonight. Somebody around here's got to make some money.
I'm all broken up here, bitch. I can't work.
Yeah, and whose fault is that?
Fuck
Oh
you.
my God, you're pathetic.
You know that new waitress over at the bingo lounge? She can give me the freaky eye.
Oh, the whore with the big tits hanging down to her knees?
Maybe I'll choke the chicken, purge my snorkel all over them flappy ass tits.
Good, we'll have a good fucking time.
I will.
I hope she likes cripples.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you.
Oh, I'll get the crutches for you. See what you did, fucking loudmouth.
crying shit.
Just like you, that's all you do is cry and shit.
Fuck you and sit on my pole right now, bitch.
Fuck off. Mom? Can't you see I'm making eggs over here?
Yes.
Since when?
Since now, they're chicken abortions and they're fucking gross.
They are not chicken abortions.
You know what an abortion is.
You know what? Can you please go upstairs and get your brother?
Why do I always have to do it?
You know, just do it. Don't you give me that look.
Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper.
What did you just say?
You heard me.
No, say it again, Ronnie. Say it to my face.
Oh, what's the matter? You jealous of your own daughter's ass, huh?
Big.
Ah! You fucking whore! All right, now clean it up.
I can't do this anymore.
If you can make it through this opening scene, it basically sets the tone for what the next 90 minutes, or about roughly thereof, are going to be. Oh boy. I should also note that I'm watching the director's cut this time around, so some things might not jive with the theatrical cut. After a lovely family breakfast, we follow Michael to school, where he runs into some bullies in the bathroom. They run through the typical shit that bullies generally tend to do in these movies. They talk about how his sister's a whore. One of them goes so far as to pull out a newspaper clipping of Michael's mother posing for an ad for the strip joint she works at.
Do you want to egg his house?
You should totally do that.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, shit pants. What's going on? You know, I heard your sister got caught selling blowjobs in the bathroom. I heard they had to pump the cum out of her stomach. Hey, Mikey, how's your mom doing? You know, my old man said that for $1 she'd rub her tits on his face.
Shut up. What the fuck do you say, faggot?
Mikey's upset.
Look how
Yeah.
tough he is.
Ball liquor. Check this out. I was thinking of making copies of Mommy for the whole school.
Fuck.
Hey, tough guy. Think she'd suck my dick for $1 and let me suck her tits?
This prompts a bit of a scuffle, and the principal walks in on them breaking it up, and Michael proceeds to tell the principal, "Fuck you." After this, Deborah is called down, and Dr. Loomis is called in, where we get introduced to him in the film. Deborah is shown pictures of dead animals and a dead cat that Michael had in his bag, having it explained to her that people that partake in this sort of behavior generally and eventually move on to people. Deborah, of course, is in denial that Michael would ever do such a thing. As school lets out, Michael trails one of the kids that bullied him in the bathroom and proceeds to surprise him, beating him to death with a large branch. We cut back to the white trash castle, where Ronnie is being useless and obnoxious, and Michael wants to go trick-or-treating, but he needs Judith to take him. For whatever reason, I don't know. Deborah leaves for work, and Judith's boyfriend shows up, so she ditches Michael to go get her fuck on. And Michael decides to just go trick-or-treating anyways, so the fuck did he need Judith for? But he's basically moping around the whole time, and it's kind of intercut with shots of Deborah at work for some reason. I don't know, just to show Sherry Moon. Also, ironically, for being a stripper, she's like the only female character other than Laurie that shows up in the movie and isn't topless at some point or another. Michael returns home and eats some candy in the kitchen before he decides that, fuck it, he's gonna murder all these motherfuckers in this house. He duct tapes Ronnie to a recliner and slits his throat. He then stalks Judith's boyfriend through the house before he kisses him upside the cranium with that aluminum baseball bat. He then proceeds to go upstairs, and he finds the mask that Judith's boyfriend had, which is the iconic Michael Myers mask that everybody knows and loves. He puts it on, and he starts running his fingers all sexually over his sister's leg, which is really fucking creepy. When Judith realizes that it's Michael and not her boyfriend, she starts freaking out and yelling at him. Pretty understandable. Before hitting him a couple times, at which point Michael stabs her in the stomach. And it kind of makes you wonder if this all could have been avoided if she just took him trick-or-treating, but anyways. She walks out of the room and down the hallway with Michael following her and slashing at her. The scene is intense too, and you know how I know this? Because the camera's shaking a lot. And, I mean, shaky cam means that the scene is intense, right? So then Michael goes into baby Laurie's room, wishes her a happy Halloween, and gives her a kiss. Deborah comes home to Michael and Laurie sitting on the outside of the house on the steps with Michael covered in blood. But apparently that's not enough of a giveaway as to what could have happened, as Deborah keeps asking him what's going on a few times. We get a bit of a montage of the bodies being wheeled out of the Myers house, Deborah freaking out, and news reports of the murders. After some more news reports about the whole situation, Michael's trial, he ends up getting transferred to Smith Grove Sanitarium after being found guilty of the murders. Michael initially works with Loomis while he's in the sanitarium. He claims he didn't murder his family, nor does he have any recollection of doing so. Deborah visits him every week and spends some quality time with him. Over the course of roughly a year, Michael becomes obsessed with making papier-mâché masks and starts to withdraw, even from his mother. During one of her visits, Deborah leaves during lunch, and in the director's cut, the nurse that comes in to sit with Michael makes an insulting remark towards him before he promptly stabs her with a fork. This director's cut, I'm starting to realize, is exemplifying more of the problems of Rob Zombie's vision for this movie. In this scene, like in the theatrical cut, rather than just have Michael sit there and kill the nurse for no reason, he had to have her say something that kind of triggers him into killing her. I don't know. It's starting to kind of feel like that most of Michael's murders are justifiable so far in this movie. Most of the characters that he's killed have been generally unlikable, and it kind of comes across as somebody wronged him in some way, so he kills them. Deborah's unable to cope anymore with all the tragedy that's befallen her family and decides to commit suicide at home, with baby Laurie apparently in the same room. Over the course of 15 years, Michael continued his mask-making hobby. I don't know if he was planning on trying out for Slipknot or what, and also not speaking. Loomis decided that he was unable to continue treatment of Michael and needs to move on and closes the case. That evening, Michael escapes, and this scene is much different than what I remember from the theatrical cut. In the theatrical cut, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he just broke out while they were transferring him or moving him to a different... I don't know. I seem to remember him being in handcuffs, and then he breaks the handcuffs, and that's how the ball gets rolling on that. I could be wrong. Correct me in the comments below. But in this one, two more white trash stereotypes that work at the sanitarium pull a female patient from her room and decide to take her to Michael's room, where they proceed to rape her.
Hey, Mikey. We brought you a little company.
Yeah, we got you some new fresh meat, baby.
Fucking bitch. You want some of that?
Yeah.
Come on, dude.
Huh?
Show us your man, huh? Some fucking pussy. Yeah. You want some fucking pussy, huh? That's good. How about some of that, killer?
I ain't gonna do it. Let me hit this.
Fucking hell. Michael then proceeds to kill both of them before leaving his room and killing any staff members he comes across. Danny Trejo's death being so far the only one that we actually feel anything for, because he's the only character other than Deborah that has treated Michael like a human being instead of complete dog shit. He then moves on and kills Ken Voorhees at a truck stop and steals his coveralls in another brutal scene because the camera's shaking.
I'm Joe Grizzly, bitch.
I'm gonna cut that mask right off your face.
After killing Ken Voorhees and stealing his overalls, he makes his way to Haddonfield, and upon arriving at his old house, he rips up the floorboards and recovers the mask that he wore 15 years ago when he murdered Ronnie and his sister. It is at this point in the film that we are now introduced to Laurie Strode and her besties Annie and Linda. Throughout the day, Laurie sees Michael watching her, even following the three girls home from school until Annie's dad, Sheriff Brackett, shows up, played by the always awesome Brad Dourif. I mean, seriously, has he been bad in any movie he's ever been in? Laurie goes off to babysit Tommy Doyle, and Linda meets up with her boyfriend Bob at the abandoned Myers house. They get their fuck on, and when Bob goes to retrieve a beer for Linda, he promptly gets killed by Myers on the stairwell before Michael throws a sheet over himself, puts Bob's glasses on to mess with Linda before he strangles the shit out of her. This scene kind of puzzles me, though, as many of the scenes in this movie do. Why didn't she notice that Bob suddenly got almost a foot taller between leaving to go get the beer and returning? I mean, there's a pretty noticeable size difference here. But anyways, Michael then heads off to the Strode residence and murders Laurie's parents. Loomis shows up in Haddonfield around this point after being alerted of Michael's escape and meets up with Sheriff Brackett. These scenes are also kind of puzzling because Brackett admits to reading Loomis's book, but he seems skeptical that Michael would be in Haddonfield and be as dangerous as Loomis claims. He doesn't get on board with what Loomis is claiming until he calls the Strode residence and gets no answer. Laurie gets convinced by Annie to babysit Lindsay, the little girl that Annie is supposed to be babysitting, so that she can have her boyfriend Paul come over. This scene is noticeable as being the only scene with any real kind of sense of suspense, as Annie and Paul are fooling around on the couch with Michael looming over them before grabbing Paul and killing him.
Say it again.
So fucking warm.
He then proceeds to attack Annie, and we don't really get to see the attack. He drags her off into the darkness and Zombie doesn't show anything that happens. And this is something that Zombie could have used more frequently, I think, because it's often what you don't see that is more terrifying than what you do see. Laurie walks Lindsay back home, and upon entering finds the badly injured but still alive Annie on the floor, and Paul strung up like a piñata. She proceeds to call the police before Michael attacks her and pursues her to Tommy's house. Meanwhile, Loomis and Brackett are informed of the 911 call by the dispatcher. Michael kidnaps Laurie and takes her to the Myers house. He tries to show her that they are brother and sister, but Laurie is unable to understand the meaning behind the picture he shows her. Using this moment of distraction, she proceeds to stab Michael and tries to escape. He gives chase, but Loomis intervenes and shoots him 3 times. Michael recovers and reacquires Laurie before she can escape, but at this point, Loomis again intervenes. But this time, Michael attacks him, apparently having enough of his shit. He grabs his head and squeezes really hard, and I'm not sure what's going on here, because if he wanted to make sure he was going to kill him, why didn't he also put his thumbs into his eyes while he was squeezing his head? And for that matter, how the fuck did Michael Myers get so strong in this movie? I mean, if all he did was just sit around and make masks and not talk to anybody for 15 fucking years, like, where did the strength come from? I mean, I know he's a big dude, but that can only explain so much. But after this, we get a little bit of a cat and mouse chase between Michael and Laurie, but there's no real suspense here again because there's nothing subtle about the whole thing. When Laurie's hiding in the ceiling, Michael uses a 4x4 to try to break away parts of the ceiling, and it's just not suspenseful. It's loud noises and shaky cam. Eventually, Michael corners Laurie, and when she makes a move to shoot him, he tackles her and they both fall over the railing to the outside balcony. Laurie finds herself coming to on top of an unconscious Michael, where she aims Loomis's gun at him. After 3 misfires, the gun finally fires into Michael's face, just as he awakens and grabs her by the wrist. And I guess that was Rob Zombie's Halloween, the director's cut. And I still don't like this movie. Listen, the stuff in the asylum was interesting. And it's the only thing that actually kind of seemed like it was worthwhile. But taking Michael Myers from a mysterious killer who was supposed to be a representation of pure evil, he was supposed to be this kind of like this force of nature. You had no idea why he was doing the things that he did. He was just doing them. He was not supposed to be a humanized killer. He was not supposed to have a backstory. Less is more in some instances, and this is a perfect example of how filling in the background details isn't necessary. And on top of that, the backstory that we're given is so cliched and overdone that it's not compelling, nor does it make Michael Myers an interesting killer in this film. The Michael Myers in Carpenter's film came from what seemed like a normal family and just one day snapped, killed his sister, got arrested, went to an asylum, broke out, and just wanted to kill people. And if you recall, in that original film, him and Laurie were not sisters, or brother and sister. Zombie's Michael Myers is a kid that between his damaged stripper mother, who apparently can't be bothered with disciplining him, his slutty sister, his mom's abusive boyfriend, and the assholes that he goes to school with, this kid never stood a chance. Whereas John Carpenter's film is masterfully suspenseful, Zombie's film has little of that. It's all about brutality and cheap thrills. Moments where Zombie could have built suspense are destroyed by Michael stormtrooping in and just making the camera get all shaky. I know the argument can be made that Carpenter's film wasn't scary, but Carpenter's film felt believable. It felt real. It felt like you were watching something happening in real time with real people that you could possibly know. It just has that much of a sense of realism to it. Zombie's film, however, feels like a caricature of real life with over-exaggerated characters and a Michael Myers that borders on being Jason Voorhees levels of unkillable. There's a sequel, so he survives getting shot in the fucking face, for Christ's sakes. And while I like Tyler Mane as Michael Myers, don't get me wrong, I don't understand why Zombie wanted to use somebody so big. The thing with Michael Myers in Carpenter's film is that anybody could have been behind that mask. He was supposed to represent the possibility that Michael Myers could be anybody and everybody, and that's why he was scary. In Zombie's film, you don't get that feeling, because, I mean, who could be behind the mask other than maybe Kevin Nash, I guess? I don't know. And again, like I mentioned earlier, why is he so freakishly strong? I know he's a big dude, and like I said, that can only explain so much. But, I mean, despite my dislike of having an almost 7-foot-tall Michael Myers, I will say Tyler Mane did a good job with what he had. He's also probably, one of the best people to be behind the mask in these movies. When he's not being directed to do these overtly brutal, like stab the person 323 times as hard as you can type of kills, he is genuinely creepy. Kind of makes me wish I could see him in a Halloween movie that isn't directed by Rob Zombie. I will say for the most part the cinematography is fine. I'm not a fan of the shaky cam during the scenes of intensity, or still not sure what he was going for there. It's distracting more than anything. But the one thing I will always give Zombie praise for is how he sets up scenes. The dude knows how to visually tell a story. And despite the problems with this movie, it does look great. From the sets to the lighting to the general atmosphere of the film. It looks fantastic. The characters, however, were generally unlikable. As I mentioned, most of Michael's victims are people you don't feel that bad about being killed. I know most people root for the slasher villain, and I do too. But when you have well-written characters that feel human and feel believable, you may still root for the villain, but you'll still have a sense of... You'll still feel like the victim didn't necessarily deserve what they got coming. In this film, though, with the exception of Danny Trejo's character, and possibly Annie and Linda, all of Michael's victims kind of give you the sense that they deserved it. Forced dialogue that sometimes feels like it was written by a 14-year-old, and I mean, I know some fucked up people, but nobody that I know has ever talked like these fucking people do in this movie. The conversations some of these characters have in this movie are just beyond cringe. I know Zombie has to inject some part of himself into his scripts, but I don't get how the dialogue is so bad in this film when he's had fairly memorable dialogue in his previous 2 movies. Zombie has a reverence for classic horror, and while I liked his 2 previous films, this one just fell flat for me. At one point in time, when I first heard that this movie was being remade and he was at the helm, I figured what could go wrong. Now that I've seen it twice, I realized so much could go wrong. I know this film does have its fans, but I'm just not one of them. And I know remakes don't necessarily have to keep to the spirit of the original films, but this is so far removed from the original film in a way that it feels like it could have been its own film outside of the Halloween franchise if you just changed the setting and the names of the characters. Introducing Laurie and her friends so late in the movie didn't give us a chance to get to know them before the chaos started. And by introducing Michael the way he did, we already felt sympathetic to Michael's plight at the hands of those who abused him. So even if we were introduced to Laurie and her friends earlier in the film, it probably wouldn't have mattered. We'd still be on Michael's side because Zombie wrote him as a victim of his circumstances. He wasn't a normal kid who suddenly turned into a killer. He was damaged before we even got introduced to the character in this film. Maybe in time my opinion may change, but as it stands now after watching this director's cut and seeing the original theatrical release in 2007, this just isn't a film that I can recommend, and I don't know if I ever will be able to.